We're all gathered here at Blair Castle, very appropriately to taste and talk about the Blair Castle Whisky, which is, for me, undeniably one of the most incredible discoveries in Scotch whisky in my lifetime, or ever, I think. It's 40 bottles which were found here in Blair Castle in the cellars. They're believed to have been distilled in 1833, put into cask, bottled in 1841, and then rebottled in 1932. And 24 of these are going to go for sale at Whisky Auctioneer later this year. And we've got glasses, we're going to get to taste it, which is pretty incredible. But before we pour it, I'd like to just hear what you all thought about when you first heard about this discovery, and what were your first impressions, you know, what came to mind?
Well, when I received the email, I was just so excited, and I thought, I don't care what's happening that week. I'm going. Because it's like a glimpse into the whisky-making past.
I've been doing archaeological digs in early distilleries, illicit stills, and we're always sitting, I wonder what it really tasted like. And I think from this era, just 10 years with the passing the Distilling Act, whether it's legal, whether it's illicit, it'll be fascinating.
Yeah.
Alice, I wonder what your thoughts are from a kind of bigger picture perspective in terms of its historical significance.
Yeah, I mean, this is just so exciting because so often I'm writing about history, or I'm, exploring history in terms of the archives, but to be actually able to taste what people were tasting in the past is so exciting. And I know that in 1844, Queen Victoria was visiting here, and I was looking at the house books from that year, and we know that they drank 4 bottles of whiskey in September 1844 when she visited. And so, of course, we don't know who was drinking that, but to be able to drink this today and think that you could be drinking what Queen Victoria might have been drinking, as if we're almost drinking beside Queen Victoria, is pretty sensational, pretty exciting.
Got a chill there when you said that.
No, it's hairs on the back of the neck sort of stuff. So I think you've all waited long enough. I'm gonna pour a dram. So just to give a bit more context about this, this is whisky that probably came from the Athol estate. At that time, there was Edradour and Tully Met distilleries were the two formerly licensed operational distilleries, but of course, in that time, you'd also have had a lot of illicit small stills operating around the estate. And I think, there's a reasonable chance, it's fair to assume that this whisky could have come from illicit distillation, small local crofter or farmer pot still distillation. And first of all, there's no other bottled examples of that in existence, so that's a completely remarkable opportunity to taste something that could be of that era, that production, that historical origin. And also I think it's important to say that this is probably the oldest Scotch whisky, probably the oldest whisky full stop from any country, anywhere in the world, given the weight of provenance there is around these bottles, where they're discovered, the number of bottles discovered. So I think all that, backs up behind it and makes it quite a remarkable experience. So shall we have a little nose and taste? Cheers. Let's
Cheers.
slange.
Slange you up.
Let's have a taste.
I'm speechless about the age of it. I still think it's amazing. I'm drinking something nearly 200 years old. Yet it's recognisable as whisky, but blows away some of the views I would have had. It would have been a rough product, it was smoky. It is a balanced whisky.
The fact it's been only, according to the records, supposedly 8 years in wood, and you can tell from the colour, the fact that the alcohol strength has been preserved above 60%, which is really incredible.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
It's a really good colour. So obviously put in, casks that
Analysis did say it was
were
oak,
active.
so it has been in oak,
Yeah.
and it's not. Well, the thing I thought about when I tried it was not just what's present in the whisky, but what's absent, and I didn't find it was overly woody or dominated by oak character.
No.
To me, it's a whisky where you've got a lot of distillate character, which I think is really encouraging and really fascinating.
I can't believe it, actually.
No.
I mean, it's such a beautifully distilled and matured whiskey. I mean, if If you had given this to me and said, guess what that whiskey is, I wouldn't have said this has been sitting in a bottle in a cellar for nearly 200 years.
The freshness is the immediate striking thing, I think, on the nose.
Fresh, bright, complex, and a little bit of peatiness. Really subtle, soft.
That's the biggest surprise. The subtlety of the peat. I thought the peat would be more dominant in the character, but you can see behind the peat.
I've just tasted it. So it's very sweet at the front of the tongue. But then we get more of the influence of the peat on the back. So you can really get that oiliness coming through. It's so interesting.
I think the power in the mouth is incredible.
Isn't it?
And
It actually, the nose doesn't actually show
No.
the power of this whiskey.
I think the nose is one thing, and the freshness and the detail and the openness of it, but then the palate is another story altogether, and the way it builds. I think talking about peat is really interesting, because when I tried this first, I expected it to be much peatier.
Yeah.
To me, what I actually find is almost more medicinal characteristics than peat. And that makes me think, well, what's happened to this whiskey in glass for nearly 200 years?
I mean, I'd love to know, what are the phenolic compounds in it? So the compounds that give it this kind of medicinal, smoky taste and aroma. And I think the way it's been bottled and stored has really helped preserve this whiskey.
Yeah.
The preservation of the whiskey and the retention of the alcohol level that have kept that freshness and that power, I think that's remarkable. I mean, when we talk about, my background with old bottles, you absolutely can tell when a bottle has kind of suffered a bit in its journey and gone out of condition. And I think you can also tell when a whiskey perhaps has gone through a more positive journey in bottle. I mean, one of the things that's really critical about this, and quite incredible in fact, is that these bottles were stored upright in a cool, dark, evenly temperate cellar with a good moisture content, and it's literally the perfect storage conditions to retain the integrity of the liquid inside the bottle. So, it's like you wait all your career in life for a historic example of pot distilled illicit whiskey to turn up, but then 40 turn up at once,
So it's the perfect conditions, is it?
Yeah,
By chance.
The fact that these bottles had, good length driven wine corks in them, and then they were wax dipped, so the levels were, comfortably into the neck. And some of them obviously have evaporated further. The ones that are going to auction, the sort of choice ones from the ones found. But the fact that the whiskey's in this great condition, a lot of that's down to just sheer luck, the storage, and also I think probably the fact it was bottled young, bottled at almost certainly cask strength. And it's a distillate-driven, young, powerful malt whiskey. But I totally agree, you don't get the intensity of the alcohol.
No.
Whether that's because of the journey it's gone under in glass and that's rounded it out and softened it. It's we're really speculating here, but
I think what's amazing, somebody decided that was ready for bottling,
Yes.
rather than letting it go, leave it in the cask and pick up more oaky notes to it. There is a touch of oak there, but it's a lovely rich nose.
It's
and
beautiful.
yes, you're right, there's a peat, but I would describe that as bordering on light to medium peat.
Very much so. I mean, a really softness to it, a real elegance to it. This isn't rough and ready, people not knowing what they're doing. This is a well-made
I suppose when you
whiskey.
think about peat and its function as a component in whiskey making in the 1830s, it was primarily a fuel source. It wasn't a flavouring agent. The flavour was incidental. And I wonder if, being located where we are in Perthshire on the Athol estate, they maybe didn't need peat to dry the barley as much as, say, if they would have done in Aberdeenshire or on the further flung Highland regions of Scotland.
That strikes to me that's peat. It's a dry peat. It's from a heathery source.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a single malt, it could be different distilleries that have come together, because back then they didn't think to call out a distillery name, it wasn't important.
That's right, yeah.
But they were probably just, they thought, this is delicious, we're going to mature this, we're going to bottle it for a special occasion. And they've really taken a lot of care over every aspect of it, even ensuring that it was stored properly.
The thing that that really strikes me about this is not just its qualities and that it's obviously old style, it was also its familiarity. It reminded me really clearly of some 1950s Clynelish that I've tried in the past. That
So
kind of
waxiness.
Highland, waxy, very textural distillate.
Yeah. And I think it's, I mean, this is 61%. So this is you know, this is a big whiskey. And I'm not getting the alcohol burn that you would maybe normally associate. And it is quite a young whiskey, you know, by modern standards.
Standard, yeah.
You know, sub 10 years old, you know, you consider it to be quite young and a bit fiery. And you often get the effects of the alcohol burn coming through, but I'm really not getting that.
It's really delicious.
Yeah, it's not got that pungency.
Alice, what do you think?
Well, and I suppose perhaps I thought that a whiskey this old would taste quite, you know, sharp or not necessarily that pleasant, but it's absolutely delicious and delightful, I'd say.
Liquid history. in
Yeah,
bottle,
exactly. This is drinking the past, exactly.
How many people can say that they've drunk the past?
Yeah.
You know, it's...
It's the only way we can access the past, really. And I suppose as a historian, that's another quite interesting thing, is that you spend so much of your time with, you know, books, dusty things,
Records,
objects,
yeah,
but
I
to
know.
have something, an artifact that's also ingestible, and you can that physical tasting of the past, that must be quite a
Absolutely. I mean, with a big challenge for historians is, you know, we are working, say, with books, with words, often with paintings and images, but to get a sense of all the five senses of, you know, of people's experiences in the past is very difficult. You know, people's smells, you know, what they actually could hear or see. You know, that's quite tricky. And so when you do have such an amazing kind of insight in the way that we have today, is quite amazing.
Going back to the taste of this, Alan, one thing that I think is absent, again, we're talking about what's not here versus what is here, but I don't get a lot of fruit flavour from it. And I think that's really interesting. And I wonder, you know, from the perspective of a distiller, what's your view on, you know, what's gone on in production of a distillate like this?
Well, that was one of the things I would have been looking for, something fruity. So that's interesting. I think this is made from not your commercial barleys that we're very familiar with. This is made from the landrace grains.
So do you think that when they were distilling it originally, they had an awareness that this was a really important batch or not?
I think in terms of what it's become today, almost certainly not. We were talking before about the age of the whiskey, 8 years old at the time it was bottled. To us, that's young, but back then, that's probably quite a mature whiskey. And I think it all ties into this idea that obviously it was considered special.
The Duke of Atholl is putting in front of the sovereign of the British Empire. It's got to be something good.
Definitely. I mean, they must have brought out their best, the very best they possibly could for the royal visit, and this is what they're choosing to serve.
Yeah. By any measure, I think it's a good quality whiskey. I think it's hard to compare it to a modern example because it's so textural, it's so old school, distillate driven, but I'm amazed at, you know, coming back to it now, a few drops of water
And as a
it's keep
distiller,
going.
I would love to know what kind of yeast the distiller fermented that with. Because we would be looking for off notes from a fermentation that's not been correctly fermented. Certainly has done no problems.
There's no butyric notes in it at all, which I was
It's
kind
very
of...
clean, yeah.
Really...
As a blender, what's your view in terms of, does this remind you of a particular style, or is this something that's kind of new to you, Stephanie?
It's familiar, but it's different as well. You know, we were talking earlier about, you know, what kind of cask was it put into? Had it maybe had brandy in it?
Yeah.
Had it had whiskey in it before? So that kind of sweetness I'm getting on the palate maybe suggests some fortified wine at some point.
That's the thing that I take away most from this is it's unfamiliar but also familiar at the same time, and the fact that it's good. I was expecting it to be interesting but to have some flaws, and going what you're saying about, you know, you're looking for flaws but it's not revealing any that I can detect.
And you know, people, you know, you'll get asked this question as well, you know, what was whiskey like back then? And you know, we've always said, you know, oh, it would probably be a bit rougher and it might not taste anything like what we've got today, but this does show very comfortingly that, you know, what we're making today is in this whisky, not exactly as we know it, but there are elements.
You can follow the DNA, absolutely. This is from essentially the cradle of the modern whisky industry.
Absolutely.
And it's the fact that it is already a familiar product with qualities and characteristics and attributes that we recognise. I think that's really fascinating. And actually it kind of, that's the thing that most upends my thinking about the history of Scotch whisky as a product and the practice of its production and the methodology. And we should be careful about drawing conclusions from just this one example. But I'm so pleased that this has been discovered and that it's been opened and we've had the chance to actually taste this, because it's the only example we're probably ever going to have. And the fact it's fascinating but also beautiful and genuinely good is, I think, amazing. So Alice, I wonder if you could perhaps comment a bit about the wider historical context of this discovery.
Of course, I mean, whisky is just such an enormous part of Scotland's cultural heritage, cultural identity, and I think it's just so exciting that what we have here is one of the oldest whiskies in the world, if not the oldest whisky in the world. And the fact it's been discovered here in Scotland is very exciting. And not only that, at Blair Castle. And I think it's just incredibly exciting, and it's actually an incredibly special moment for Scotland and Scotland's cultural kind of identity.
As far as I'm aware, there's no other whisky with the same weight of evidence and provenance behind it about its origins and its authenticity. And you know, the fact that we've got the estate records, we've got chemical analysis, actually tasting the liquid itself. It's legitimately an absolutely incredible and completely unprecedented discovery. And a Scottish person, it's, how cool is that, you know, for like the oldest whisky in the world to be Scotch whisky. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And cheers, it's been an absolute pleasure to taste this with you all, and
What
an experience.
Lunch more.